This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. You need to talk to others when you do a job search. And to make the most of these conversations, you need a strategy. Cam Yenokida is here to talk about why you need to network intentionally to get your next job and how to do it well. He's an executive coach and the founder of Achieve Excellence. Cam's company helps leaders and teams elevate their influence, presence, and performance. He joins us from Lake Oswego, Oregon. Let's jump right into it, Cam. Why do you need to network to get your next job at all, especially if you have all the required skills?
Gosh, when I think about networking, I'm reminded of the fact that positions and opportunities don't move through postings, they move through people. And nearly every meaningful role, whether it's an individual position or a leadership and executive role, or even a board seat, moves through relationships. And not always a close one. A lot of times it's that subtle statement of, hey, you should talk to so-and-so, or I think you'd be a great fit for this. And so networking then becomes less about kind of building connections and expanding your contacts, and it's more about placing yourself in that ecosystem where opportunity already exists.
Why do referrals matter so much to employers when a hiring manager is making a decision about who to interview or make an offer? Why do employers put so much value on referrals?
Yeah, referrals really change everything. And the reason being is that when you have a referral, you're not just passing along somebody's name, you're actually transferring a little bit of trust. And that trust is a really valuable currency in the hiring process. From a hiring perspective or a hiring manager's perspective, referrals automatically seem a little less risky. And from a job seeker's perspective, referrals can actually shorten the process and get you real insight into company culture and the organization's challenges so that you can best position your abilities and skill sets to satisfy those needs.
We're going to talk in a moment, Cam, about how to create referrals, but I want to just focus on the referral itself. Sometimes when I talk to applicants about the power of referrals, people think, well, gosh, I don't play golf with this person or didn't belong at, we weren't in the same sorority together, so I'm not going to be able to create referrals. Do you have to know someone really well to get a referral that's valuable that matters to an employer?
No, I don't think so. In fact, that's one of the things that I think that stops people from networking intentionally is that they feel like they have to have the perfect contact or the perfect connection to really create influence. The reality is that what you're really trying to do is demonstrate some level of trust, credibility, and competence. And so by doing that, a referral, like I said, is more about transferring a little bit of that trust. And to an employer looking for somebody, they're going to really want to know, is the person I'm talking to trustworthy? Do they have integrity? Do they have good values? Do they have good morals? Well before they get into the actual skill sets or competencies that they're looking to satisfy for the job.
We're going to talk in a moment about what intentional networking looks like, but what kind of networking should people avoid?
Gosh, yeah, I'm a big proponent of trying to avoid things that drain your energy. One of the biggest mistakes that I see out there in networking, especially for newer networkers, is that they make it really transactional. And what I mean by that is they show up, they have a bunch of business cards, They say, hey, this is what I do. This is what I'm good at. Do you have a job? Do you have something for me? And I think that this is a real mistake because the goal of networking, again, is to enhance your influence and develop some credibility in the community. And so, in order to do that, you really need to be intentional about your approach to who you're connecting with and what you're trying to accomplish by that interaction.
And what are the building blocks of an intentional networking strategy? What do you have to have in place, Cam, before you start reaching out to people?
The first thing I think about is that intentionality really builds clarity. And what I mean by that is asking ourselves some questions. Sure, the basic questions of, what are my skill sets, abilities, interests, and passions are important. But also, who am I trying to meet with? Why am I trying to meet with this individual? And what am I hoping to learn and share at the same time? And I think when people have that type of a strategy, then they can create a real structure around their approach so that they can track who they met with, how they got introduced, what they learned, and what topics of importance potentially surfaced from those conversations. And that strategy really comes into play for two reasons. One, it comes into play when you go to follow up and cultivate that relationship. And two, it comes into play when you get really tired because it can be an exhausting process. And so the better strategy you have, the more consistent and disciplined you can be.
Okay. Well, let's unpack that, Cam. And the first step you mentioned was know the skills that you offer. And why is that important to be clear about that before you start reaching out to people?
Yeah, the biggest reason is because I think people really attach their identity to their career. And so the whole idea of looking for a job can be pretty daunting. And so I always encourage people, your listeners included, to really get centered on what their abilities are, the transferable skills that they've collected through the experiences that they've had. And it's really a chance to not be humble and to be really proud of the things that you've accomplished. Because the more centered you can get on the values and experiences that you bring and the skill sets, that's going to show up in how you show up in these networking interactions.
Okay. So know what you offer. And the second step you mentioned was be clear about who you want to meet and why. I see people struggle with this. They're not sure who to contact exactly. What if you don't have the answers to that question? Why you want to meet with someone? What does that indicate to you as a coach? And what should you do about it?
Yeah, I I think that that really stops people in their track. And so my encouragement to clients and people that I talk to is to start small. And what I mean by that is instead of looking for the perfect introduction or the perfect contact, start with people in your network, in your neighborhood. Start with friends, start with family, start with people in your community, people that you already have a relationship with, that you can sit down and really explore your interests and your passions. And by doing that, not only will you learn more about other people and potentially what their roles and responsibilities are to refine your search, but you're also going to be combating one of the biggest enemies in a job search, which is isolation. Getting out there and just starting small actually starts to build a lot of momentum.
Terrific. Well, let's pause and take a break. Stay with us. When we come back, Cam Yenokida will continue to share his advice on why you need to network intentionally to get your next job and how to do it well. We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Cam Yenokida. He's an executive coach and the founder of Achieve Excellence. Cam's company helps leaders and teams elevate their influence, presence, and performance. He joins us from Lake Oswego, Oregon. Now, Cam, before the break, we were talking about how to network intentionally to get your next job and how to do it well. And we talked in the first segment about why it's important to network, the value that employers place on referrals, and how generating these referrals can transform your job search. And we talked about some of the challenges people face in networking. And you began to share some tips with us. Another step that you recommend people take to network intentionally is to follow up. And you touched on this in the first segment, but why is it so important to follow up when you network with others, Cam? And what stops people from doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reality is, I think what stops people from follow-up is either one, they're not quite sure what to do or what to say or what to send, or they may reach out once or twice or three times and not get any response. The reality is the person you're sitting in front of might not be in a hiring position, or they might not have a position readily available. So that follow-up piece is super important. And the more intentional and curious you can be throughout the interaction, the more intentional you can be about follow-up. And so what I like to challenge people in doing is ask themselves, what did I learn from this interaction that would be of interest to the person I'm communicating with? And when they look at it through that lens, they can find a small, genuine interaction or act that keeps them top of mind and not just visible, but relevant. So that could be an article or a resource, or it could be another connection within their network that might satisfy their need.
So look for a way to provide value to the person that you met with when you follow up. What if there was a step the person you met with agreed to take and it hasn't happened yet? How do you recommend following up to make that request happen? And how many times do you recommend someone follow up before giving up and moving on?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mac. I don't know if there's a silver bullet from that. I tend to look at things through the lens of people are busy, and if we're really trying to be relevant in their space, that you can never really follow up too much as long as it's under the lens of being professional and providing value. Now, at the same time, I'd say if somebody didn't respond or acknowledge after 7 or 8 or 9 real true attempts, then yeah, maybe it's worth kind of moving on and focusing your energy in other places.
Okay. Be persistent, but be prepared to move on
Sure.
if you don't get a response. Uh, Another tip that you recommended in the first segment was the importance of taking care of yourself when you network. And you talked about in our first segment how networking can be exhausting. How do you recommend people care for themselves when networking with others?
Yeah, Mac, this is a big one, and I don't think we talk about it enough. The reality is a lot of job seekers, especially the ones that have been at it for a while, are getting tired and frustrated. And like I mentioned, a lot of people associate their identity with their professional career, and so just by putting themselves out there, it can be a real threat to that identity. And in order to take care of ourselves, it's really personal or individual, I should say. But I recommend three things. One is to create a habit or a routine that unlocks energy and enthusiasm. Two, limit exposure from people or things or places that take away our energy. And the three is to really build a strong support system. People that know your value, know your skill sets, and can offer you support, encouragement, and sometimes accountability.
Sometimes when people look for work, they want to put as many hours as possible into a search for good reasons. They want to find a job as quickly as they can. They might have obligations to family. And is there But is there a point, thinking about burnout, Cam, when you can burn the candles at both ends and see diminishing returns? What is your advice there?
Yeah, 100%. And that's where the routine comes in. If you think about elite athletes that work hard really on their body and physical effort, they always build in recovery. And no matter if you're looking for a job or you're in a high pressure position, that ability to recover, rest, and re energize is critical in how you're going to show up. And especially in a job search, it's less about checking the box and moving through all of these steps. And it's more about how can I really intentionally put focus and energy into these steps. And in order to do that, you need to be at your best.
Is there a schedule that you recommend people follow when uh, doing a job search, particularly when they're networking intentionally? Should you be working 30 hours a week, 40, 20? What have you seen work well for your clients?
Yeah, I think it's in that 20 to 30 range, and making sure that you're really kind of balancing out your efforts. So, for example, you're not sitting in front of a computer every single day filling out applications and resumes, and you're really building in these networking opportunities or opportunities to get with more supportive people. And I think if people really took a balanced approach, that they'd find that when they actually do sit down to kind of get through the nitty gritty of it, that they can really buckle down and focus on it, knowing that in an hour or 2 hours, I'm going to be off grabbing coffee or lunch and gaining energy a different way.
Okay. So intentional networkers know what they offer. They're reaching out to others, and they know why for strategic reasons, and they're taking care of themselves. In in identifying the contacts they want to make, again, you touched on this earlier. Many people think they need to have the perfect contact, and you encourage reaching out to starting with family and friends. But as you move beyond those circles, Cam, what what is the best way to decide who you need to reach out to strategically and who you don't need to connect with?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think that as people refine their search and get really clear on what they're trying to accomplish, then they can kind of compare that with people from their circle of influence. So I usually encourage people to start with colleagues, past colleagues that they really worked well together, alumni or associations that are working in or around the industries that they're interested in. And by doing that, they can really be intentional and strategic about the people that they spend time with because those folks are going to have the most insight and knowledge into the industry, maybe some of the challenges, and certainly to some of the potential hiring managers and organizations looking for positions.
Okay. So you're having these conversations, you're finding out what the hiring trends are, what matters to hiring managers, who actually might be posting a job or has an opening. But when at the end of these meetings, whether they happen informally at an event or in someone's office or over a Zoom call, how do you know it worked, Cam? How do you measure success when you're networking intentionally like this?
I think you can measure success in a couple of different ways. Number one is that individual can either offer to introduce you to other people, or when you ask, they're more than willing to introduce you to other people within their network, or you're learning valuable insights about real challenges that organizations in that industry are facing, which is gonna help you prepare even more intentionally for an actual interview process. So I think that there's a number of ways that people can really measure the success of an interaction.
And so you're uncovering opportunities, you're getting insights that can help you in an interview. You're also getting referrals, aren't you, Cam?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Positions and opportunities don't move through postings. They really truly move through people.
Terrific. Well, now tell our audience, Cam, what's next for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just appreciate being invited to the conversation again, Mac. I've got a lot of respect for you and your team, and I really value our relationship. For me, I'm personally on a mission to improve the world, and I do that by working with leaders and executives and their teams in developing strategies to be more effective, to be more intentional, and to discover more clarity and meaning in their work. And so for me, what's next is just an extreme honor and privilege to work with the folks that I'm on this journey with.
Terrific. Well, I know that our audience can learn more about you and your work by visiting your website. That's achieve-excellence.com. We'll be sure to include that URL in the show notes. And you also encourage our listeners and viewers to connect with you on LinkedIn. When you do reach out to Cam there, please mention you saw or heard him on Find Your Dream Job. Now, Cam, given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want our audience to remember about why you need to network intentionally and how to do it well?
Yeah, the one takeaway I want your listeners to remember is that they provide value too. And networking not only puts them in the ecosystem where opportunity exists, but it also gives them an opportunity to share their insights and to share their experience and their skill sets with other people, which elevates them as a person of value.
Thank you for listening to Find Your Dream Job. You can support our show and help others find it by leaving a review and rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a question or suggestion? Email me at mac@maxlist.org or connect with me on LinkedIn. To make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at maxlist.org/podcasts. This show is produced by MaxList. Susan Thornton Hoff schedules our guests and writes our newsletter. Lisa Kislenberry Anderson manages our social media and creates our transcripts. Our sound engineer and editor is Megan Hattie Stahl. Our music is by Freddie Trujillo. This is Mac Pritchard. See you next week.